consensus around any steps we might be able to take together. And as I said at the beginning, I'm here to listen and to learn and see how the state can be a better partner in working together with the community. Our waterways are really critical to our way of life. They're critical for agriculture, for outdoor recreation, for the tourism industry. And when they're not as healthy as we want them to be, it causes problems. It causes problems to livelihoods, it impacts lives, it impacts wildlife, and that's why getting all the voices together is really important. We've seen fish counts in the Jefferson Basin declining over the last decade, although we've hit some lower numbers here more recently. I think it's important that we work together. And so one of the steps we've taken in my direction, FWP has announced new efforts for additional research and monitoring to really understand the situation first. Action's hard if you don't know exactly what's going on. I don't know, Dustin, if you want to comment on that very briefly about Dustin, Director of FWP, what steps the agency has taken to kind of get a handle on what's going on. And then we'll hear from the biologists, and we'll make sure everybody else gets heard as well.
Thank you, Governor. So Fish, Wildlife, and Parks views this issue. It's not a Region 3 issue. It's not a fisheries issue. It is an agency issue. And so all the resources of the agency that have been stewarded to us via the governor's budget are available. So we've done some things in addition to our regular fisheries monitoring and management work that we do in Southwest Montana. We launched our Sick Fish online reporting tool. We've expanded staff training and participation. We're pursuing some additional seasonal staff to help our regular fishery staff respond to this. We continue to work on our fish sampling and our fish health program. The histology samples that a lot of talk's been, there's been a lot of coverage about. There's that expertise across the country still really limited. We're still pursuing getting those read. And then we've got a really robust research plan that you're going to hear a lot more about from Dr. Al Zale from MSU and from Jim Olson, our fisheries biologist, that are both here today to speak to that. There's a four-pronged effort there that they're here and prepared to speak in detail about.
Okay, thank you. So let's hear from biologists first. Dr. Zale, what do you know?
Not enough. In fact, there's a lot that we need to learn and find out, and that's what my students and I will be doing. We've been doing that in collaboration with other faculty there at MSU, Tim Klein, Chris Guy, other faculty, and then also we've worked very closely with FWP.
I got ahead of myself, Dr. Zale. We haven't done introductions. So Clayton, why don't you start? We'll go around, do quick introductions, then we'll get into the discussion.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you, Governor, and thank you for being here. My name is Clayton Elliott. I'm the Conservation and Government Relations Director for Montana Trout Unlimited, and I'm based in Butte.
Okay, great.
I'm Wade Fellon, co-owner of Big Hole Lodge.
Greg Fellon, outfitter, Wise River.
Al Zale, I'm the unit leader at the Montana Cooperative Fishery Research Unit at MSU.
And it's your students going to be doing some of the research.
Yes, and I'm also very proud that many of my students are working with FWP now and doing a lot of the background work that was needed to have make this all happen.
Okay, good.
I'm Dustin Temple. I'm the Director of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
I'm Jim Olson. I'm the fisheries biologist on the Big Hole River.
Pedro Marquez. I'm the Executive Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
I'm Jim Hagenbarth, the rancher from the Glen area and on the Big Hole Watershed Committee and one of the founding members.
Thank you. So this is really an all hands on deck situation. So Dr. Zale, could you tell us what you know?
Sure, you bet. And
Can I ask a quick question? Do you have a speaker system? It's hard to hear back here.
At least stand up when we speak.
Okay, thank you. We'll make sure can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a much softer voice than the governor, I'm afraid. So I will try to scream out at you here. It's a big group that we've got here, bigger than my usual classes. I usually just deal with grad students, and there's like 5 or 10 or 12 of them, and we're having a closer discussion. So this is a big group for me, but it's great to see you all here because we need you to be part of this research. There are parts of it that are going to require the anglers and other recreationists out here to be part of it. So we're looking at a number of different things. that we need to investigate what we... Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. I don't think it's on. Does this help at all? Yes. Oh, excellent, good. I can't hear myself. So we have a number of different things that we need to be looking at to see what's going on with the fish populations here. And we want to look at things at a number of different stages and times in their life cycle and try to figure out where the problems are. Once we know where the problems are, then we can start to work at fixing things. One of the biggest things that we want to look at is the mortality of fish as adults. We know that some of them die. They all eventually die, but how they're dying and at what ages and from what is really important to us. So we're going to be putting out a lot of tagged fish. In the various rivers, there will be thousands being put out each year. Each fish will have a tag, and each of those tags will be numbered. So we want to keep track of what each fish is doing. We'll know when we tag them. We know when we'll see them, when Jim is out electrofishing. But it's critical to us to find out about those fish when you see them. When you catch them, we need to have those tag numbers reported to us. If you release them, we want to know that. If you keep the fish, we want to know that. So that's going to be a really important part of it. And that way, we'll be able to tell when the fish are dying, if it's during especially warm periods, low water periods. If those fish are being handled too many times each, we'll figure that out. And find out what else is going on out there. If it's during a period when we're seeing disease, that a lot of them are dying, we need to know about those fish. And we also need to know kind of at the other end, diseased fish that you're seeing that are dead and dying, or the zombie fish that you might catch, we need to see those, we need to have those reported. So there's that adult mortality part, including the disease. We won't have a student on the disease project necessarily yet until we have a little bit better idea of what's going on there. We will have a student working full-time, one technician, working to figure out what's going on with that adult mortality. So that's somebody who you'll probably be seeing here quite a bit in the future. We haven't made our decisions yet about who we're recruiting. We are recruiting internationally, trying to find the best people from anywhere in the world to do this work. I did a lot of the whirling disease work 20 years ago, and at that time we did the same kind of big recruitment effort, and we got Eileen Rice to do that work, and she now is of course running the fish division. So hopefully we'll get people of her caliber again to do this sort of work. Another part of it that's going to be run primarily by Dr. Timothy Klein, new faculty member at MSU, will be looking at juvenile fish. Looking at where they are coming from. Which streams are they coming out of? Which spawning streams? Or are they coming from the main stem of the river? And that'll be looking at some otolith microchemistry, where we take the ear bones out of the young fish and juvenile fish and slightly older fish and try to figure out where it was that they were born. You can do that based on the water quality, because all those streams are a little bit different, and we can try to backtrack where they came from, and then also where they're going. And a big part of that is also going to be to try to find out if there is excessive mortality of those young fish, if we're not getting enough of them to grow into bigger fish. And we want to find out at what time of the year it is and where it is, because sometimes we can then figure out ways to fix that problem. We had a big study on the Henry's Fork. Close to 30 years ago now, we figured out, doing the same kind of work, that a lot of the fish, the juvenile fish, the little guys, they were dying in midwinter, and if we put a little bit more water out of the dam there during the midwinter, we could get a whole lot more fish the following spring. So we're looking at, again, things in that kind of a way, find out where they're going, if they're dying, or where they're coming from, and then see if we can do some kind of remedial efforts. And then part of this also is going to include a lot of creel surveys, interacting with the anglers, people who are out there. We're going to be doing that at fishing access sites. We're going to be finding out who's fishing, for how long, what they're catching, and so there'll be a fair amount of that, and those of you who will be asked for an interview, we hope that you'll participate in that sort of thing and help us to understand how much fishing is really going on out there. So that's a really critical part of it as well. But that is a very labor-intensive sort of thing as well. And we would like to come up with better ways of finding out how much fishing is going on any specific reach of the river at any specific time. So we're going to be kind of researching some of these kind of artificial intelligence, machine learning kind of things, where we'll maybe be using satellite images to count vehicles at boat ramps, to look at who's coming down the river with automatic cameras and be able to then count how many anglers there really are. And of course, there's just a ton of images that come across in that sort of thing. And so we're going to be using some of that high-tech kind of stuff that the people at the university know about in an effort to come up with better counts, more efficient counts, and doing it in such a way that we don't have to bug it at the boat ramps. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what we'll be doing. We'll have a number of technicians, undergrads from the university involved in this. We'll have 3 PhD students as part of this, people who already have an undergrad degree, a master's degree, people who could go out and do real work, but who want to come and help us solve this problem. And like I said, we're still at that recruitment phase. If you know anybody who's looking for a PhD assistantship, let me know.
So Jim, can you just talk from the perspective of FWP and your work here on the Big Hole?
Yeah, really from our perspective, you know, we're very excited about the direction that we're going in right now, to be able to be partnered with MSU to help us figure out what's going on. The thing that's been difficult from my point of view is not being able to understand what's going on. It's very difficult to come up with solutions on how to fix it. And so that's where being able to partner with the university and having these studies going on, my biggest hope is that we'll get some clear management direction on what to do. If it's recruitment limited, we need to improve spawning habitat, or if it's disease issues, there are potentially some things we can do to mitigate disease. We did similar sorts of things around Melrose, and when whirling disease came out, we were able to do some habitat restoration projects there, because there were some hot spots for whirling disease around Melrose, and we were able to reduce the amount of disease in the river by doing habitat work there. So if it is something like that, we just need some clear direction on what's causing these things. We know for sure that water is the main driver in our fisheries. When we have really good water, our fisheries improve. What we've seen is declines above and beyond what we would expect given water alone. And so we're trying to really figure this part out so that we can come up with management solutions to mitigate these things, so that we can get our populations back to where we're within the range that where our target range is for them.
Thank you, Jim. Wayne and Craig, you were the ones that reached out originally. I'd love to hear from you, and particularly, what are you seeing on the ground as you're guiding people on the river, and what's the impact into your businesses?
Sure. Thank you. We're seeing what Jim just described, and what Dr. Zale described with, zombie fish, for lack of a better term. They look like chemical burns on their face. We've put some of these on social media. A lot of the guides have been sending them to Brian Wheeler, our executive director at the Big Hole River Foundation, Pedro at the Watershed Committee. Now there's a portal online where people from around the state can submit dead fish. Some of them are killed by us, guides and anglers. Some of them are dying from this cauliflower-looking chemical burn, and Dad caught one today. I got a rainbow with lesions yesterday, and it's really exciting to hear that there will be someone to collect those live zombie samples on the other side soon, because I've had 4 of them alive in the cooler this summer, and there's a gap in where that goes and how it gets to the lab in Pennsylvania. Knowing that flow and warming temperatures are the driving factors of this fisheries decline, and it's not new. This isn't a 2023 issue. It's been going on for, well, the decline has been going on for 10 years. We have photos of these zombie fish dating back to 2014. I think there's a lot of great data available already, studies already done at DEQ. Big Hole River Foundation has 4 years of water quality data from the entire river at 10 different sites every 2 weeks. DNRC has all sorts of great data on flow. FWP obviously has all this manpower behind the biology. Have you considered forming an interagency task force with more than just FWP, DNRC, USDA, DNRCS, and bring all the data together, bring all those folks to the table now? Because what you're talking about, Dr. Zale, is a long-term solution. And science moves slowly. I understand that. We're not going to find something overnight here. But with the data available to us, I think we could learn a lot more about our watershed this summer. You know, a fishing client of ours just sent us a study on the fire retardant being directly linked to kidney disease in trout. Is it increased knapweed spray through the valley? Is it hydrochloride on the rivers? These are all theories floated to us by folks that are concerned with no background in it. But I'm sure if we got the agencies together working on this, we could all have the all hands on deck moment.
Yeah, and Dustin, you have access to all that data. And so you're absolutely right. We need more collaboration, bringing people together. And that data is certainly available to FWP. If it's pertinent to the research, it's there. So, Craig, what do you want to add?
I'd just like to add a quick comment. Here, I'm put it next to my mouth. A quick comment on hoot owl enforcement shortcomings. There's an element of fly fishers and anglers that come to our area to fish the big hole. And this element comprises people that are very experienced and know what they're doing. And they bypass fly shops, they bypass boat launches, they know where to get in where few people are, and they either don't know about hoot owl restrictions, or they do know, but they know that nobody's going to bother them. And so I think we have to address that problem. I just made a few notes that I'll read off. If one experienced angler fished during hoot owl hours and unknowingly disobeyed restrictions that resulted in killing 6 spawning-sized fish per day from Melrose to Browns Bridge for 5 days, this person would end up killing 30 spawning-sized fish over a consecutive 5-day period. If that person or different people occupying that one person's slot fished 20 days during hoot owl, this would result in 120 spawning-sized fish. If 4 experienced anglers fished 20 days during hoot owl from Melrose to Browns Bridge, this would result in the death of 480 spawning-sized trout. This total would come very close to the total population of the wild trout in this section of the river today. But even more concerning is the fact that the dead trout caused by anglers fishing during hoot owl are spawning-sized trout, which makes things even more severe. To address this problem, I recommend giving more hours to our present Big Hole River game warden to be in the field more often, or hiring an additional game warden. In addition, I recommend hiring a lower level game warden that would be more involved in education rather than enforcement. This would allow this lower level game warden to cover more river miles in a given day and educate more anglers and save more wild trout. This would be expensive, but as I explained above, it would save a lot of wild trout starting tomorrow rather than waiting another year. In addition to all this, we would also be saving a lot of small businesses like our local motels, bars, restaurants, fly shops, and lodges that hire a good number of local employees. We got through whirling disease years ago, and with the help of our governor, FWP Department, Big Hole River Foundation, Save Wild Trout, Big Hole Watershed Committee, guides and outfitters, general public, and private donors, we can beat whatever is taking our wild trout. We all need to work together as one big team, and if we do this, I'm confident we'll succeed.
Greg, thanks for making specific suggestions. Are you observing people fishing during hoot owl restrictions?
I don't know. And the cars parked, we don't have hoot owl from Dickey Bridge to Maiden Rock, so I don't fish down below that.
But your point is well taken. If people are violating hoot owl, additional education or potentially some increased warden presence could diminish the impact of it. I'm curious for both you, Wade and Craig, what impact have you seen in your guiding business and at the lodge?
Thank you. And I speak for more than just Big Hole Lodge here. We just take 8 clients per week. And Dad's built a very loyal clientele over the years, but we've had to change our product for sure. You know, redefining a successful day on the river, getting off the river at our own self-imposed 68-degree water temperature rule, which is another one of my questions. DEQ's water quality standards are 67 degrees for beneficial use. When you put in treated wastewater or effluent back into a river, it can't be over 67 degrees. So I would love to see an updated study on whether 68 degrees or 73 degrees, when should we stop fishing? We stop fishing at 68. Our clientele has bought into that. They'll get up at whatever time we get up in the morning when the river's the coldest and go fish. It's harder for clients that travel into fly shops and meet their guides, and I know some of the guides and shops you'll hear from in the room have really been hurt this summer. I know tourism is down statewide. COVID restrictions have been lifted, people went abroad, but I think if you ask any of these businesses that rely on summer tourism, the media around this issue has not been helpful to business.
But you have a loyal base, so you've been okay.
We've been okay. How long will that last? I don't know. How much more can they hear about a fisheries decline? And 6 fish was a great day today. Let's go home and play croquet in the yard. But I think we lost several gauges. You know, before you were governor, some of the gauges were taken off the river. So in a lot of ways, we're flying blind in terms of when the water warms. You know, our guides installed real-time temperature loggers that hang out of the floor of the boat. I've seen a lot of guides doing this on the river. A lot of people know right when the river hits 73 degrees or 68 degrees. The Big Hole River Foundation's worked with DEQ on this monitoring program at 10 sites. It makes sense to me with this money available to put in a really robust monitoring system with dissolved oxygen readouts, nutrient content readouts, temperature and flow, and come up with a better, for the angling community, a better nexus of what water quality standards are safe to be fishing under. And if it's just 73 degrees and the river's just trickling, and that's safe, then we'll get off this soapbox. But if it's lower than that, I think you'll find the fishing community to be very willing to change our standards.
Dustin, do you want to talk about water temperature or oxygenation? Maybe it's a question for Jim. And what do we know?
And Governor, I would defer that to Jim Olson.
I'm not sure what, the Big Hole is the most heavily gauged river in Montana. We have more gauges on the Big Hole than we do any other river in Montana. That's mostly related to the Arctic grayling work in the upper part of the watershed. But
Are those available to the public?
yeah, well, not all of them are. Do you want to speak to that? Pedro does a lot more of the water monitoring stuff. Is that okay?
If I can just find it on our phone quick.
Looking for made in Montana food products? Look no further than Town and Country Foods of Dillon.
Find it on our phone quickly, I think you really helpful.
Yeah, so on the gauge issue, I'll just stick with that. That was one of the first things that the watershed committee did when it was founded. So we've been around for 28 years. And I think, you know, the founders, a lot of them are in this room, figured out that if we don't know how much water and how hot it is throughout the river, we don't know how to manage it, right? So we put, the watershed committee was involved in getting those funded. The CCAA gauges, they have like 120 point locations. Those are all on private property with enrolled landowners that have agreed to voluntary reductions in their management plans, right? And so those are heavily monitored all day. You know, DNRC has full-time staff, FWP has full-time staff to watch those all summer. And they're in direct communication with the irrigators when those triggers are hit, right? So those CCAA enrolled landowners are giving back everything and more according to their plans every year that we have low water. As far as the rest of the river goes, you know, we were at the legislature for 2 sessions pushing for more stream gauge funding, and it was really great what came out of this session with dedicated funding for more gauges, expanding the network. There's a little bit of a mismatch. What we realized, what my predecessor realized, was that the gauges were funded by multiple agencies and no one quite knew how they were funded. So a mega spreadsheet was developed and we kind of figured it out. And some of that got streamlined. DNRC took over some gauges from the USGS. USGS continues to maintain other ones, and they operate on a match system. So for every dollar the DNRC puts in to maintain a gauge, the USGS matches it. The Big Hole Watershed Committee has still been paying. This year our bill was $4,000 to keep temperature readings coming out of 3 of our gauges, some of the critical ones, along our management plan. So we've been on the hook for that, and that was sort of a handshake with DNRC years ago. We just foot the bill, and we count on partners. This year, George Grant, Trout Unlimited, came up with the money to pay for those gauges, and they have for the last 3 years. If you text drought to 26989, you will get a readout of the 5 gauges on the Big Hole that are related to our drought management plan.
Could you repeat that again?
26989 is the number, and you just text the word drought to that number, and we have a automatic messaging that comes out every Thursday morning. It'll tell you what the reading is at each of the 5 gauges, temperature and flow, and what the drought management closure criteria are also. So that was something, actually, the ranchers told us they wanted. They were the ones that kind of, and that was when I realized that everyone's using cell phones, and that is the easiest way to communicate to folks. So we put that in last year, and folks have responded really well to it. That's one way, because otherwise you do have to search around and look at different gauge sites in different places.
I guess that's my point, is you guys are doing fabulous work, more gauges than I ever knew about. Big Hole River Foundation is doing fabulous work with nutrient content, dissolved oxygen, and flow.
Yeah.
Can we incorporate all this into one spot where the general public, instead of waiting till Thursday, can open up a phone, pull up the Beaverhead River and look at, there's one gauge on the Beaverhead River, it's down in Twin Bridges. It's constantly 77 degrees. Can we see what it is in Dillon, what it is at Barrett's? Can we pull all this great data with, you know, the technology available to us and make that available to the general public to save these fish this summer?
Ultimately, it's FWP's responsibility, and I'm going to rely on them to kind of pull this stuff together. I think that's what we're looking for here, is to figure out what do we need to do to make people more aware. So I appreciate that.
And that may already exist. So a version of that exists. The DNRC has one, right, that's up and running. If you go to the bhwc.org/river conditions, we are just pulling off of that Upper Missouri Headwaters drought management system. And that does pull from different gauges, but not all of them. You're right. So there's very few places where it's all together in one spot.
Yeah, but that's a good, you know, DNRC is monitoring it on behalf of FWP. If there was a better opportunity to pull it together in one spot, and they love putting dashboards out there, so. Pedro, you did a good job responding to his question. Do you want to add your voice to the conversation
Sure, thanks.
and your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a real honor to represent this organization. I think it's a model for how to get work done, how to collaborate, and how to bring different stakeholders together. I mean, as Wade was talking about, can we just have an interagency thing? I mean, I feel like what we're trying to do and have been doing for 28 years is exactly that. We are an open forum. We meet every third Wednesday in the Divide Grange Hall. Every third Wednesday we have an educational talk by some resource professional, informing us, giving us data about some aspect of the Big Hole watershed. We can only make decisions based on data and science. We're not going to make decisions based on social media.
Who attends that meeting?
It's open to the public. So the first half of the meeting is always sort of an administrative update on all the projects we do, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we always invite speakers. This was a model set up 28 years ago, by Jim and others in the room. 1988, the river went dry at Wisdom. A lot of you remember that. There was like 100 CFS down at Melrose. That was a big wake-up call, and it spurred the kind of conversation that we're having now, and folks got together, and the Watershed Committee was the result of that. And for years, we focused on bringing up the data and understanding the watershed, so we knew what was going on with water. We understood fisheries declined. The concern really was Arctic grayling at the time. I think it's important that we're here talking about a commercial fishery. We started really saving the last fluvial population of the grayling was where we started. And that has worked. Maybe the grayling is maybe the only fish in the Big Hole that actually has improving fish numbers, right? And it's because of all the voluntary work happening through the CCAA program and all the habitat conservation. So we run the drought management plan. I kind of described the gauges. That is a cooperative-based system. That is it's a call down list. It's a commitment by irrigators to work together so that in times of low water, there's not one guy or gal out there taking their full water right to the detriment of everyone else downstream, which anyone here could do, right? So it was sort of a cooperative agreement. It still stands to this day, and this is why I think it's really a model and really an amazing effort that goes on. And every year, ranchers are all calling each other. They're giving back as much water as they can to maintain their operations. What I came to the committee with was a background in restoration ecology, and we've been really pushing proactive measures, because the drought management plan is a reactive effort, right? We can only respond to what precipitation does in a given year. It probably goes without saying, but all the water we have comes in snow and rain. That's it. There's no dam, there's no lever we can pull to drop water in the river. So I think this cooperative model, if something else replaces this cooperative model and the cooperative model goes away, I think you'll see a decline in the state of the fishery pretty quickly, even worse than what we're seeing now.
It's a testament to the community, the way all the private landowners have come together to protect the watershed.
Yeah, and it's not 100%. We don't have 100% cooperation. And so when we look at proactive measures, how do we either make more water or store more water? I look at it from the perspective of how can this landscape store and retain water as long as possible? We called it holding back snowpack, right? We have a YouTube channel, there's videos about it, but if you can retain as much snowpack as possible when we have a bunch of it and rain, slow its progress through the watershed, there are restoration and conservation practices that can get us there, and we've been doing a lot of it. For every dollar that's been donated to the Watershed Committee, we have brought in 5 times that amount in federal and state grants to do projects, and that's hiring engineers and contractors to do work on the ground. And we're slowly sort of amassing the evidence that shows that these projects make a difference. What we've done with FWP and the French Creek drainage, it's the second largest fish project in Montana. We've got 50 miles now of headwater tributary streams being stocked with only native fish. To me, that's the direction. That's the direction that I like to go in. It's project-based. It's working with landowners that come to us with issues. We're designing and going to fund 6 new head gates for irrigators on Jerry Creek and Wise River, one south of Melrose, and if those go in, they're going to go in with measuring devices. So giving irrigators better ability to control and manage their devices. Some of this infrastructure that's just old, you know, some folks want to give back water, they just can't. Then literally the head gates don't close all the way. So water kind of keeps going down their ditches. Little things like that. I think that's where our focus is, keeping folks together, keeping folks talking, letting the science lead, and then following with bringing the money in and getting projects done is kind of where we land.
Okay, great. Jim?
Thanks, Governor, for bringing all of us together. And it's certainly a pleasure to represent the ranching community. We've been on the river the longest. We got on the river after we came out of the mines. You mentioned Brown's Bridge. My great-grandfather in 1870 put a toll bridge at Brown's Bridge, and consequently Brown's Lake and Agnes Lake. So we know a lot about this river because it's our life. And before the late 70s and before the general public standard of living increased to where they had more leisure time, we managed this river quite a lot differently than we do now. But what we did in the past lured people here because we took care of this resource. And we were the only community around, along with the loggers and the miners. And we're very proud of what we have. But as people came and joined the community, and the general public and recreation came from the urban America, they don't truly understand how everything works. And so, since 1900, we've lost 0.6 of an inch of precipitation till now. So in 1900, we had about 16 inches. Now we have about 11. That's had a huge impact. The question here is water. And we can make a difference, but they're long-term solutions. And we're going to have to be patient. The first thing we need to do is to get adjudication done so we can put measuring devices in and everyone can be confident that they're taking their fair share. And the general public can see that. That's important. Most of our water, as we all know, as ranchers, is tied up in the watershed that's covered by conifers that weren't there 100 years ago. The watershed yield is poor. And that's where our water is. It's unbelievable how much you lose. And it's a real problem in America today. Hardly anyone understands that. And the extreme litigants, every time the agency tries to do something positive to manage the timber resource in the watershed, they get stopped. And some of the litigants have made a business model out of suing the federal government and being paid to equal access to justice. They don't give a damn about the resource. And you can see opinions in the paper all the time. And the reason I'm so upset is because we've all given our lives to this resource and we understand it. And those folks who don't have a clue what's going on are stopping us from doing our job. We are the folks that are managing all the jurisdictional polygons. And it's huge. Forest Service, BLM, state, Fish and Wildlife. And we have a responsibility. We understand nature. And we have a responsibility to nature because we're part of nature. We also have a responsibility to society because they've given us the property rights that allow us to be on the land. So we have a huge responsibility to manage this resource, and it includes the water. But we can't do it because the extremists won't let us do it. And we have a responsibility to manage the public lands because the grazing resource is managed with the disturbance of livestock, and livestock and the ranch have been vilified by social media. And we have a very difficult situation. But what can we do in the long run to get more water? First thing is watershed yield. We've got to get after that. That's where the water is. Second is off-stream storage. Hell, my grandfather, both in Montana and Idaho, built dams with horses. They're still there. They're still functioning. You can do it. But everyone says no. And that's not reasonable. It's not responsible. The next is groundwater storage. As we move to sprinklers, you're losing the groundwater storage that keeps this river going later on in the year. But there's a lot of other ways. You talk to Tech, there's places we can run winter water and develop groundwater storage. And that's huge. The state of Idaho put about 570,000 acre feet of groundwater storage in the upper snake. We live on the Hills Fork at the headwaters. So groundwater storage is huge. And the other is cloud seeding. And I personally have been working on that, and the governor knows that. And we're starting to move on it. Idaho has generated 1,250,000 acres of storage of water using cloud seeding in 4 places in Idaho. And that issue we got to get after, and we got some money, thank you, to start working on it. So what we need to do is take the long-term approach, because we need more water. And if we don't take care of our water, I'll guarantee you those folks downstream will try to take it away from us. And it comes off federal land. And there's only one act called the McCarran Act that's preventing them from doing it. If that ever gets in federal court, we're in a lot of trouble. But the ranchers are here. We love this resource. We made this resource, and we invite you folks to come and use it, but responsibly.
Thank you, Jim, and I always know to follow Jim on water. I've learned a lot from Jim through the years working on water policy in the state legislature, so thank you for those comments, Jim. And thank you, Governor, for being here. It's such an honor to have you here in this important issue. I just wanted to offer a couple of thoughts. I know there are a lot of people in the room who have the opportunity to speak too, but I wanted to start by saying thank you to FWP for listening. I think the investment and the dollars that we were able to secure in the legislature for the agency to double down on science is a critical first step. As we start doing the restoration work and the work that Jim's talking about and Pedro's talking about, having a better roadmap and Jim Olson being able to tell us where can we move the needle the most. Is it tributaries? Which tributary? Is it the main stem? Which part of the main stem? This research from MSU is going to be critical in that. And it unlocks the ability for those of us who are doing restoration work to make the most benefit. And part of that has been the leadership of your agencies, and DNRC, I really want to speak specifically to for moving the needle on water law. We've been doing in-stream flow transactions for a long time in this state. I sat in the signing ceremony on House Bill 114 with you, a huge transformational law changing the process by which we can legally work together to change water. We had permit applications that were tied up for 12 years in permitting with legal statutory black holes, as we call them. To move that from a 12-year process to a 106-day process is transformational. So when we have the data and information that Jim Olson can tell us of where on a tributary, we can work with willing landowners, work together to change that water right, and to do the sort of things that Pedro's talking about, improve irrigation infrastructure at the same time that we're benefiting fish. And we have a legal system and policy and law that helps make that. The last thing I would just end on is Jim Hagenbarth is exactly right. Adjudication and getting through final adjudication, critical step, and then imagining a world of how we maintain McCarran compliance. We worked very hard on a bill this session. It didn't get all the way done, and I'm excited to be part of the comprehensive review for the next 2 years to see where we can go to keep moving that forward. The last thing I'd end on is storage. We got to find better ways to store more water because from a trout unlimited perspective, we completely agree with the biologists and MSU. Water is the primary driver. We got to find a way to better use water and to better use water in a way that everybody in this room, it cannot be robbing Peter to pay Paul. We can all win here, but we have to better understand the data. Where can we move the needle? And we need to have laws and policies that help get us there. And your administration's been doing a lot of good work on that, so thank you for that. There's a lot of work to do, and I, along with Farm Bureau and stock growers and Jim and others, we're here to roll up our sleeves and work together to make our system of water law that was designed 100+ years ago has a tremendous value. But the world's a different place today, and we can do better, but we have to work together to do better. So thank you.
Yeah, and Clayton, you've been very open to do that. And Jim, I just want to thank you for the passion that you shared today. Clearly in love with the land and been a remarkable steward over generations.
Well, it's everyone's responsibility.
It is. So I heard a couple things so far, and we'll open it up for comments and questions of the audience. We don't know all the science yet. We still got a little work to do to figure out exactly what's going on. These diseased fish we're seeing, the lower populations, are not completely explained by lower water levels. Is that correct? So there's something else going on, and we don't quite know what it is yet. That's why this research is so important. But there's a few things we do know. There's not enough water in the river, and it's not cold enough. Water storage is part of that. Jimmy pointed out the thirsty conifers drinking the water. I saw that myself on a forest management project out in eastern Montana, where when they thinned a forest, the surface water came back in a matter of months because the trees drink a lot of water. And we have a twofold goal there. One is we need to reduce the fuel loads so our fires aren't as bad. It's going to improve the fish habitat if we do it. And I was very pleased recently. I had the chief of the Forest Service out here, and we looked at some good projects. In fact, we brought them down on Basin Creek just south of Butte. I don't know if folks know this, but if that drainage were unable to provide water for Butte, they pump out of the Big Hole. And that's not a good option for all the domestic water for Butte to come out of the Big Hole River. So we're starting to work on that Basin Creek to get the fuel loads reduced. And the Forest Service, it takes a while to wake them up, but they finally woke up, and there's work going on over there now as we speak to manage some of those roadless areas to get the excess timber out. But we don't have all the answers today, but I want to hear what other people are experiencing because of the water quality and the fishery,
And I would just ask, we do have a lot of people, so I'm gonna, if we could, limit people to a minute or two. Step up, just identify yourself, state your question or comment, and we'll go from there. I'll be right back over.
Can I ask one more question?
I'm just going to hook up the mic for the public comment.
Can I ask you, knowing that if this long-term solution, we end up bottoming out for 500 fish per mile?
I'd like to make a comment on something. I'm a rancher here in White River. I'm 80-some years old. My wife has kept the temperature here for 50 years. What has changed? And that if we look at our change, a lot of it is fires in the mountains. They're coming down Meadow Creek, which comes through us, and their acidic is coming into the streams. And that is one of the things that I think that you're looking at is acidity in the water. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment too.
If you don't mind,
how I'm dressed.
no, you're looking good. Step up to the mic.
I, like most of the people in this room, came out of the hayfield to be here because it's a very important issue. The ranchers and farmers in this state make up the bulk of our economy. But we also, as Jim has said, have a vested interest in preserving these resources. Far more so to us than recreation. And I think where we are concerned, with all due respect to Trout Unlimited, you talk about changing the law structure, we're the ones who always have to give up. Not recreation, not fisheries, not the government. Agriculture and people who use these resources, who depend on them for generation upon generation upon generation. We are the ones who always seem to come out losing in the long term when legislation is changed. And that is our greatest concern, and that is something that we really, really need to be involved in. I think agriculture needs a bigger seat at this table than what we've seen in the past on these issues. Thank you.
You built it.
Who else would like to speak? Yeah, please, sir.
I'd like to come up to the mic as well.
My name's Charlie Iver. I'm a property manager, live a couple miles up the road here. And I learned to fly fish from my dad when I was 8 years old. Became a very appreciative person of the environment. And it's where we live. It's the water we drink. We have to take care of the water, and I think the Clean Water Act is a super important act that the government has created. And we need that to follow through on what we have. I appreciate everybody that's here. The governor, thank you for coming and addressing the issues here. I think we all need to look at the fact that we're in an age of species extinction around the world. And we need to participate in protecting everything that we have. Climate change is real. I think we need to acknowledge that man has caused a drastic change in the weather, and we need to acknowledge that and participate in saving species around the world. And if we can acknowledge that right off the bat, then we're all going to be better off. We'll have better water quality. And I would like to acknowledge Pedro and Jim with the Big Hole Watershed Committee, who've been doing their work for a very long time, and Wade and Craig, part of the Big Hole River Foundation. I'm hoping that maybe there's some state money that these two groups could use. And they've been on the river for a long time. They know it better than most people. And so if you can come up with any money to help this river, I think these two groups should be the ones using the money. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
See how much trouble I can get in up here.
My name is D. Carastia. I've lived in this valley for about 45 years now. Avid fisherman since I was just a child. Not a child anymore. I've fished the river here every year throughout that many times. Outfitted on the river for a while. Just because I love to be here. That's why we live here. I love the country. I love the kind of neighbors you have in this country. This is a tough question because it strikes me that over the last 10 years, I can document in my own mind, I didn't write it down, but each year fish numbers went down on the Big Hole, on the Wise River, all the streams that I fish. And it's kind of a screaming problem at the moment. And I'm wondering if anybody's considering, as hard as that might be to do, whether some reduction in pressure, not just 2 hours, to save what is left of what was teeming years ago and now is in scarcity. And I don't know if there's been any efforts taken, and I welcome the work and the contribution of all these people, and I thank them for it. I just wonder if what we're contemplating, if anything, in trying to get the pressure off of the remaining fish that are sparse. Anything?
Well, I would say when we know what's going on, we know high temperatures and low water levels are hurtful to the fish, right? Particularly that they should not be stressed. If we were convinced that it was a pressure issue, that was the issue, we have an obligation to preserve the fishery.
Okay.
So, but that would have to be taken up by the FWP Commission, and I would say,
I'm just speaking in terms of trying to preserve what's left before that's really decimated even more, because there's not that much left, and pressure is a factor.
Yeah.
In it.
Understand, all actions have consequences. If you were to say tomorrow, no more fishing on the Big Hole, these guys would be out of business.
I understand that, and I acknowledge it was difficult to start with. You know, when I wanted to raise the issue, I said, I know this is an extremely difficult issue, and livelihoods depend on it. I know that.
Sir, I think what we need to do is find proposals that we can build a broad consensus on. And if there were additional restrictions on the river that would improve the situation, we would certainly consider them.
Okay.
The important thing is to build consensus around them first.
Okay, so really there's nothing that's contemplated at the moment. We're going to do research first, which is an approach.
Outfitting and guiding has been limited on the Big Hole since the historic use policy went in place. So there's been no increase in outfitted use days. Dad and I have our allotment and we don't go over them.
Yeah.
So there has been an increase in angling, and that's something we need to look into. We're also hearing from the state that angling pressure may be like 1% of the problem, but it will be involved in their study. And rivers like the Madison with 3 times the pressure are not seeing the fish die off with this zombie-style chemical burn. So something else is going on here. And I would say we're very much also stewards and love this river and this land, and have been at the table for many years to try and solve it. And I think our point today was, with better communication of the data available to us in one area where we can access it much more quickly, the angling community will come together and do whatever we're doing wrong, we'll fix.
Fair enough.
Dam on the Madison though, too.
I just was concerned about in the short term. I don't know that it's a long-term solution to anything, but in the short term, it would have to save some fish who are not
In the short term, we're the only ones finding the sick fish, it seems.
The director just mentioned there was some recent action by the commission, maybe you could share that.
Yeah, so in terms of what are we doing to protect what we have here in the Big Hole? The commission recently took some action to close fishing in certain reaches at October 1st to protect spawning brown trout when they're most vulnerable, along with some gear restrictions to try and reduce any mortality related to angling, particularly when those fish are most vulnerable. So there have been actions contemplated by the commission and taken to protect what's there. As the science, we're going to go where the science takes us, and if those restrictions, if there are further actions we can take, we'll work with our partners in the agricultural community, the tourism industry, outfitters and guides, and everyone to figure out what's the best thing to do. But we have taken some action, and again, there are other things that could be done once we know the outcome of this.
And if there were additional proposals brought to the commission, they would decide on.
Okay, Governor, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate your approach. You got my vote last time. But
I try not to screw it up.
I have to make one tangential comment. And it strikes me that paved put-ins and takeouts will invite more fishing pressure. I've been fishing all my life. I've never been disappointed in driving across gravel to get to the put-in. And it seems to me when we've got these kind of problems pressing down on us, spending money on that is way out of line, with all due respect.
Pedro wanted to add something.
Real quickly, so historically, since the state's first drought management plan was put in place here in the Big Hole, FWP is, because we are a consensus-driven organization, FWP kind of follows our consensus on the triggers. So our drought subcommittee, after the fish numbers came out, Jim proposed that when Section 4 reaches a flow trigger of 150 now, that to avoid the pile-on that happens in Section 3, which never closes, right? And then all the angling happens in Section 3 because the rest of the river is closed. His suggestion was if we hit 150 at Section 4, that we should close Section 3 also. We went through our drought subcommittee, and that was agreed to by consensus, and I'm still waiting on the final word, but I haven't heard anything from our governing board against that proposal, so I'm pretty sure that we're going to end up adopting that emergency measure and adding it to this year's drought management plan. So that would effectively become...
Clarify where Section 3 starts and ends.
3 is Dickey down to Maiden Rock.
To
FWP Maiden Rock.
So that'll close when the flow triggers are hit down in Glen at 150.
Down in Glen at 150, and that was, you know, we're following the recommendation of the biologists. It was hard to get this consensus. We do have a guide representative on the board. We do have the River Foundation represented on the board. We also have a conflict of interest policy for all governing board members. It said if you have a vested financial interest in the decision being taken by the watershed committee, you have to bow out of the decision making. And so that was used in this case because it was an obvious conflict to the guide businesses.
Credit to you to bring everybody to the table to build consensus around these issues because they're hard, and they impact people's livelihoods and way of life.
How about on Section 1, the upper end where you still have 5 trout you can catch? Would you be changing that at the same time?
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Or is it still the grading management area?
Right, so the upper rivers upstream of Dickey Bridge, we manage primarily for the conservation of grayling. And grayling are negatively correlated with brown trout. So we are trying to reduce the impact brown trout could potentially have on grayling in that particular reach. So there's no proposal right now to change that limit up there.
Okay.
I think we have time for another question. One last question.
Governor, thank you for coming. J.M. Peck. I'm a third-generation rancher near Melrose. I'm also here representing Montana Farm Bureau Federation. And I just want to thank you for bringing this roundtable together today to discuss this important issue. Water is our most valuable resource, and Montana, as a headwater state, shares a unique role in water policy, not only in our state, but in our country and around the world. And I do appreciate the comments that everyone's made today, that we need to look at science-based approaches, and then we need to have policy that supports our Montana economy through agriculture, and that agriculture is one of our biggest resources, one of our biggest economic drivers in the state. And I just really wanted to thank you for coming down today, and appreciate the comments of everyone here today, and recognizing that water is our most valuable resource, and that we need to work hard to maintain it, to store it, to make sure it's available for everyone to use for all the beneficial uses of the river. Thank you.
Okay, you get the last word.
I guess I agree with most everything Jim Hagenbar said. I think the one thing we really need to work on is trying to get some dams in these small creeks up in these hills where you're not going to be flooding out productive hay ground and stuff. When we first started the watershed committee in 2 or 3 years, we had a proposal in the creek, and I don't know which one it was up here. And it was shut down by the Forest Service because they had a campground pretty close to it, you know. And I guess the one thing I'd like to say, a lot of this stuff that we need to get done, everybody needs to get together to try to do something with this equal access to justice. These anti-production do-gooders are stopping everything that we need to do. You're talking about cutting the timber, you're talking about doing that, and we're paying them to stop us. And somehow, not just agriculture, but everybody needs to get on that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I fought it when I was in Congress. It's worse than, it's become a business plan.
Yeah.
And these organizations, the only thing they produce is lawsuits. And that's how they raise their money. So we're going to need a change in administration in Washington before that happens.
Okay.
You got my full support.
And I guess, you know, I would just like to bring one thing up. I've been all my life here, irrigated, and when every time this gets like this and you hear some stuff about these ranchers need to cut down on their water, we don't have an eighth of the water we're adjudicated to right now that we use it, and I'll bet you most everybody is not using a fourth of their water because they don't have it. And we got to find something different that we can all work on, and I think some dams to store some water would be a good way to do it.
So this meeting is really just the beginning. We have some research to do. I think there were good suggestions made about education and law enforcement, particularly as it relates to FWP. The collaboration that's going on locally is really encouraging, Jim, particularly for your leadership. I appreciate that. The managing our forests again so they're not drinking all the water. Storage are all things that need to be on the table to talk about.
I'd just like to make one comment, a couple comments. One is, everyone talks about protecting. You don't want to protect. You want to enhance, always enhance. And then you go forward. If you protect it, it just goes to hell. And as far as the Endangered Species Act, that's for species. What's important is the habitat. And if you manage for a particular species, for a particular condition of the habitat, you're going to destroy the habitat. You need to manage for the habitat. And then the species can go the way they're going to go. But important, don't protect, enhance. You've got to enhance all the time.
Well, I applaud the consensus-based work that you're doing here at the Valley, and I appreciate the importance of this. This is a serious issue. We need to understand it a little better, and then we can act with purpose. In the meantime, we'll continue to consider appropriate regulations to preserve the resource and make sure our farmers and ranchers stay on the ground. So I just appreciate everybody coming out, and know that our door is open. If there's additional comments you didn't make, feel free to reach out to our office. And we'll stay in touch with the principals at this table and make sure we continue to move the ball down the field. So thanks for coming out today.
Thanks.